A man chooses to leave his soulmate to avoid hurting her, but fate brings them together again. Chapter 10. Next in the I crept to the forest edge, paws digging into the dirt. I lifted my snout up, sniffing the air, eyes owning in on the second-story bedroom window. Back turned to me. My mate lay in bed. My soul burned as I stared at her, remembering how I had fled the library. I knew if I didn't leave I would mark her then, and even if I didn't, I never would let her go. She would hate me if I did it. So I ran. I was broken from my thoughts as her parents' shouts reverberated from inside the house. I raised an ear to listen. "I can't believe you, John," Luna Smith yelled. "You scared away the man who was your best friend, son. You scared away a good man, a kind man, your daughter's mate. And now you have ruined our door short at happiness." "Sylvia, listen." I heard him pause. "Oh no. Don't you, Sylvia, listen me. I will not take that bull crap, John. You're right." I heard him seethe. My head rose and my eyebrows with it. "You are right, Sylvie." I didn't hear the rest because the sensation of being watched snapped me out of my eavesdropping. My eyes made contact with my mate's, who was now sitting up and staring at me from her window. It was unsurprising considering I was staring at the window. Teachmate Bond likely startled her. I moved to head back into the forest where I'd leave to go home when I saw her eyes widen and her run from her bedroom. Moments later, she was slipping through the screened door and put into the cold Alaskan. She had nothing but boots, sweatpants, and a tank top on as she clutched her shoulders. The biting Alaskan cold was already turning her shoulders pink, and I growled at the thought. Her footsteps paused and I realized my mistake. Laying down and exposing my belly, she dropped her shoulders and released a sigh, walking towards me tentatively. When she was a yard away, she knelt down into the snow and extended a hand towards me. I stood up and walked toward her. I decided I would not be hesitant this time and walked right up to her face. Her hazel eyes explored my face, reaching a hand out to softly touch my head and pet it. When I stood still, she smiled lightly, bringing her face into the moonlight ever so slightly. Enthusiasm in the moon's glow. The freckles that dusted her face were evident. A soft reminder that even in Alaska the sun still shined. I noticed tears well up in her eyes as she petted me as her strokes became slower. Soon she was releasing hiccups and I felt my stomach become sick. I did this to her, trying to alleviate her tears. I licked her face and she half-heartedly laughed. "Thank you," she sniffled out. Hesitantly, she wrapped her arms around me and hugged me. I leaned in, sniffing her hair and tucking my head into the crevice of her neck. Wiping a hand to her nose, she pulled back and gently pet my face. "Can I talk to you?" She paused as if expecting an answer and then laughed. "You probably think I'm an all-human for being comfortable with you, but you are clearly a weird wolf, it doesn't really matter. Plus, maybe you're a coping mechanism I've created in my mind, and this is all actually a dream," she rambled. Then, she paused as if realizing what she had said. "Wolfie. Can I call you Wolfie?" I licked her face in response and she smiled, making my heart flutter. "Wolfie." Her voice cracked and tears poured down her cheeks again. "There was this guy and I really liked him. He showed me a flicker of what love could be, and I've never loved anyone. At least, romantically." She looked at the sky. "He was so beautiful," she cried. So beautiful." I looked at her as inquisitively as a wolf can and she laughed. "Oh no, I don't mean how he looks. Well, he is beautiful. But no, Wolfie, I mean his soul." I found myself awe-stricken, stuck to my place in front of her. Did she really call my soul beautiful? I wondered in bewilderment. He had the most beautiful soul you've ever encountered. I sensed something deeply broken, deeply misunderstood, and yet his gentleness exceeded bounds. His grace had no end. His attention and his dedication were astounding. She sobbed into her hands. I found myself astonished at how much she understood me in such a short period of time. She had seen into the very depths of my soul, and instead of finding the broken ugly, she found beauty. I listened as she cried, and my soul began to ache more and more. I wanted nothing more than to shift and sweep her into my arms. to tell her that she was everything to me, that she was beyond the beauty of the stars in the sky, and words couldn't describe the bounds of the beauty of her own soul. But I was frozen, stuck, because I wouldn't scare her away from me. Her father's threats didn't matter anymore, but losing her did. Wolfie, he left. He was everything and he left. And I'm nothing. He was everything, and left with a sinkhole of emptiness that I didn't know existed before I met him. Once again, her arms were around my neck holding me, and I just basked in the moment. I basked in what little time I had left with her. I had to return to the pack at some point, and I couldn't bring her with me. I couldn't be selfish even if I wanted to. Ripping her away from her life where she was so clearly happy, so clearly in tune with every member of her pack, would be like tearing a vital organ from a person. She was integral to this town, and without the town, she wouldn't survive. I wish he would come back, she mumbled. I wish he was here. She held me until her body slumped over in a deep sleep, nuzzling her with my snout. I checked she was sleeping before unwrapping myself from her arms and moving away, shifting back to my human form, and getting dressed. I scooped her into my arms. Warmth filled my chest, and I was struck with terror at the thought of never seeing her again, never holding her again, never touching her, smelling her, kissing her again. I clung to her like a lifetime, knowing the longer I held on, the closer I got to bringing her down with me, the closer I got to taking her away and never turning back. Sighing, I slid through the door of her home. The shouting had ceased and silence had fallen over the home. I worried about testing my luck a second time. This was the home of an alpha after all. But I found myself undisturbed as I carried her to her room and laid her on the bed. Sitting beside her, I carefully removed her shoes so that she wasn't woken up. Then, I pressed a kiss to her forehead. I wish I could stay too, I whispered. But I can't. I brushed the hair out of her face and held her face gently. She nuzzled her face into my hand on instinct in her sleep, grasping it with her tiny fingers and pressing it further into her cheek. I smiled softly as tears plagued my vision. Everything hurt. Leaving hurt. But I couldn't stay. Standing up, I pulled the covers over her body. Leaning down, I pressed one more kiss to her forehead. This one long and heartfelt. I poured my morning and irreverent love into it. The impending separation seemed to be slowed by it until I found I forced myself to pull away. And then, I left. I had left. Left for good. Or at least that's what I had told myself. But it was the next night, and I found myself once again at the edge of the forest, looking at Evelyn's window. This time, her back wasn't to me. She was staring into the forest, golden eyes searching. When her eyes landed on me, I saw a small smile grace her lips. She ran from her room and I heard her soft footsteps sprinting around the house. She came out in a nightgown with a large trench coat on her boots again. With a smile, she walked over to me, and I sat down letting her hands peruse my wolf face and pet me. She sighed. Wolfie, you really are a wonderful dream. I tilted my head at her. It was the only way I could think to question the fact she thought I was a dream. She looked at me and giggled, rolling her eyes. Oh, come on. You can't expect me to think this is real. That a wolf would let me pet him and talk to him freely. I nodded my head. Her eyes widened as she gasped and fell back on her butt. I snorted at the funny displacy. You understand me. A real wolf wouldn't understand me. She laughed. I walked towards her, nudging her to sit up with my head. She responded, pressing herself up and wrapping her arms around me. I emitted a hum in response. Did you, Jasper? She laughed. I growled slightly, making her eyes widen. She put her hands up. Okay. Placing my head in her hands, and then in the crook of her neck. Wolfie, I'm so sad I feel sick. My soul is aching. Why am I so miserable? Do you think he will ever come back? Tears welled up in her eyes. I know it's ridiculous because I only just met him. How could I feel things so strongly towards him? But I just have this feeling. She paused and pulled my face back from her neck to make eye contact with me. That he is special. My heart swelled up and it took everything in me not to shift and wrap her in my arms. To tell her she was the most special thing I'd ever encountered. Her heart was pure gold and I was going to capture it and make it entirely mine. My heart beat for her. And her alone. But I couldn't. I couldn't steal her away from the reality in which she was so happy. Why do you think he lied? Wolfie. She thought aloud. I mean, well, I about a girlfriend. She pouted, looking to the snowy floor. I would say it was because he was disinterested in me, but... well, then that wouldn't account for the kiss. For a few moments, she was silent, sitting in deep thought. I wished we had a mind link so I could press into her thoughts and dispel her worries. I saw the way she crinkled her forehead together, and I wished I could smooth the lines of trepidation away. Leaning forward, I licked her face and she offered me a small smile. Thank you, Wolfie. She smiled. I should probably go to bed, but I want to stay here. Using my snout, I pushed her to lay down and she giggled. What, are we sleeping in the Alaskan wilderness? I huffed in agreement, curling my wool from around Hector's stance. She rested her head on my back and my upper body lay adjacent to her own. I listened carefully as she fell asleep before once again, shifting, getting dressed, and carrying her into the house. As I entered, I felt a change in the air and I quickly turned around, eyes coming in contact with Luna Smith. She sat at the kitchen counter, chair facing me. It's not what it looks like, I began, but Luna Smith raised a hand to silence me. She stood up and walked around the kitchen aisle, looking at her daughter with a soft smile and then at me. Maximus, you belong together, she sighed, and relief flooded my chest. But I sensed her words were the beginning of something I would not care for. But, Maximus, you cannot keep doing this to her. You are only temporarily alleviating the mate bond. And soon you will not be able to leave. I stood silent, Evelyn snuggling her head into my chest. I had never been a man to show my emotions. I was taught from a young age not to. But, at the Luna's words, I felt tears fill my eyes as I looked at the precious being who held my entire world in her small hands. How could I let her go? I questioned myself. Luna, one more night. You can see her one more night, Maximuson, then you must go if you do not plan to stay or bring her with you. I nodded, turning to carry Evelyn up the stairs. And Maximus. I turned around and faced her. Her green eyes looked sorrowful, and for the first time in my visit, the Luna looked aged and tired. I'm sorry, she whispered. I nodded my head, a tsunami of emotions filling my chest. Carrying Evelyn to her bedroom, I laid her on the bed gently, pulling back her soft pink covers and tucking her beneath them. I looked at her sleeping form in despair. Tomorrow night would be my last to glimpse at her face again. My last to look at her eyes, to see her smile. I knew the next night would be my last to see her ever again. I had debated even going to the forest edge. I considered just driving home and not turning back. But I knew I couldn't avoid saying goodbye. As I walked towards the house, I found her waiting for me, beneath the twilight of stars. Evelyn stood in the middle of her yard, arms hugging herself. I walked to her slowly, tentatively. I wanted each moment to be extended as long as possible. Wolfie, she whispered in a sigh. Her breath filled the winter sky in a cloud of smoke as she smiled. Walking to her, she instantly sat down, taking me into her arms. Oh, how I would miss her tender affection. We sat in silence as she continued to hold me, petting my fur. You know, Wolfie, I'm starting to think this isn't a dream after all. She paused, but then I'd have no explanation for how I have ended up in my bed each morning. She sat quietly before suddenly laughing. Unless, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. You carried me or something. If my wolf eyes could have widened, they would have. But luckily for me, the twinkle in her eyes told me she didn't believe that for 1 second. It was all a jest at her own confusion. Wolfie, tonight I'm not going to whine about a boy. I'm not going to cry anymore. At least I'll try not to. I'm going to tell you about my dreams. I wagged my tail, excited to hear about what her wishes for the future were. She laid down on the Alaskan floor, and I joined her as she looked at the stars. One day, I want to have a beautiful home made of oak and mahogany, a large cabin stashed away in the woods, with high ceilings and a large kitchen. The kitchen will have beautiful granite countertops and plenty of space at the aisle for a large family to sit around. The master bedroom will overlook a mountain or maybe a lake. My heart stopped in my chest. The home she described was my own, word for word. Her intricate details mapped out my home. And I want lots of children. She paused. Maybe 4 or 5. And I'll read to them in a library in the house. Oh yes, I forgot to mention that. I will have a grand library, full of a massive collection of books and complete with a fireplace. My husband and I, we will read stories to them every night, huddled around that fireplace. Pain, searing pain was filling my body. Her dreams were surreal, so close and yet so far, so chained away from my grasp. I was going to suffocate. Her dreams were my own and yet I couldn't fulfill them. It will be a cozy place, a place of love and warmth. She smiled. My home will be a dream itself. I stood up, my legs shaking. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle the pain of her presence, of imagining a future that couldn't exist because I was going to hurt her. Being near her was unbearable and I wanted to run away, and yet when I saw her sit up and concern paint her face, I found it more unbearable to go. I looked into her eyes, trying to convey the beauty I found in her dreams, trying to speak understanding through the vision of a wolf, and as if by some miracle she could read my mind. She rested her forehead against her own and rubbed her hands along the sides of my body. Thank you for listening, Wolfie. You are a true friend. And, as if on cue, the mate Bond took hold of her, as she yawned and slumped against me. Before lying down to sleep, shaking, I shifted and changed, sweeping her into my arms as I muffled my sobs. Sitting on the ground, I clutched her to my chest, rocking back and forth. My soul was being ripped away from me. My entire being felt like I was on fire, scorched from the incoming burn of leaving. But I gathered myself together and stood up, carrying her into her house for what truly would be the last time. Walking into her bedroom, I laid her down, but instead of letting go as she usually did, she held on. The mate Bond seemed to sense that our time was up. Knowing it was my last chance to hold her, I slipped into the bed with her. Rather than prying her fingers off me, I allowed myself to bask in the feeling of holding her in my arms as she laid on me, snuggling her face into my chest and breathing deeply. I smelled her hair, the beautiful roses, lavender, and fresh cotton smell that had become ingrained in my brain since I met her. Suddenly, I heard her breathing change and I heard a small gasp. Raising her head ever so slightly, Evelyn's eyes half opened and widened. Max, she whispered as her voice shook. There was a sense of awe and almost relief on her face, but I knew I couldn't let her stay awake. Panicking, I quickly released my hum, knowing that it would put her to sleep, rubbing her back. I soothed her back to sleep, as she mumbled my name over again. Soon, her breaths returned to normal, and with all my willpower, I pulled myself away, dragging myself out of the bed. I tucked her sheets over her and kissed her forehead and then her. They were soft and tender. Those lips that had smiled and laughed so many times in my stay stood still and breathless in her sleep. I'd never see her smile again. But it had to be this way. I couldn't uproot her from her life. She would never be happy with me. She would never love me if she truly knew what made me so broken. And even deep down, if I knew that maybe that was a lie, because Evie was the most loving person I'd ever met, I still convinced myself otherwise. Goodbye, Evie, I whispered, leaving her sleeping form. This time, I headed to the front door, knowing my car was hidden at the front side of the house. As I reached the door, I was surprised to see Alpha Smith standing there. His eyes looked tired, and when his gaze met mine, the happiness I expected to see was instead a look of pure mourning. You don't have to leave, Maximus. I was wrong. His voice broke. My daughter. She cares for you so much, Maximus. Please don't leave without her. And for a moment, I thought about wrapping her in my arms and taking her away. Away to the cabin in the woods. I can't do it. John, I'm sorry, but you were right. She is better off here. And I turned away, walking out the door. Each step was full of searing pain as I walked down the pathway, away from the home. I turned back to stare at a little white house. This was Evelyn's home, not mine. Getting in the car, I sighed and pushed my hair out of my face. I pushed the key into the ignition bit. The car released a soft rumble and I drove away. Chapter 11, Evelyn. I groaned. Maximus. My face shot up, as I found myself lying on my stomach. I groaned, pushed my matted hair out of my face, and sat up. My head ached as my dream from the night before came to the forefront of my mind. I had awoken to an odd comfort. Warm, strong arms encircled me, and I felt fingertips tracing my skin. My eyes were heavy, and yet I willed myself to open my eyes. I found myself lying atop a strong masculine body, and my eyes searched for his face, Max. My voice shook. In that moment, his cold blue eyes seemed like waves willing me to sleep. A soft hum filled the air, lulling me like the ocean's waves. It seemed familiar, as if I had heard it before, but my mind was too tired to place it in the basket of memories that filled my head. I felt soft hands caress my back as kisses were pressed to my forehead. And with that, I melted back into the world of sleep. It was an odd dream, as if my psyche was taunting me with wishes to be with a man who left without a word but "I'm sorry." His departure seemed to haunt me. Am I really so obsessed with him that I dreamed he was in my bed? Pain seemed to erupt in my soul as I realized that Maximus was gone. It was an ache of absence that the dream just reinforced. My room and my house, which had once felt so warm, suddenly felt cold and empty, lacking. It lacked him. Sighing, I got out of bed and grabbed a hoodie and sweatpants from my closet. I looked in the mirror, taking in my sunken eyes. The ghost-like face in the mirror made it truly look like my soul had left me. Breathing deeply, I braided my hair and grabbed a bit of concealer, trying to cover my exhausted features. I had promised to go with Maudie to visit Mr. Weaver today, so no matter how crappy I felt, I knew I had to pull myself together, for Maudie's sake at least. Walking downstairs, I saw my parents sitting at the kitchen aisle. They both looked at me expectantly, as if awaiting me to say or do something. I noticed how they both looked exhausted. My dad's white hair, which usually looked thick and wavy, was unkempt. His tanned skin looked pale, ghastly. My mom looked slightly better, but she looked aged, as if 5 years had passed in a matter of days. I stood in silence for a moment, just staring at them, and they stared back. My dad peered at me through his reading glasses, and my mom twiddled her fingers around a thermos of coffee. Is something wrong? Pulling my brows together, the trance broke as my mom awkwardly laughed. Oh no, nothing, honey. We've just been a bit concerned about you. You know, this is the first time you've come down from upstairs in the last couple of days. I was incredibly confused. The last few days felt like a blur, with memories of a strange wolf in my dreams clouding my vision. I grasped my forehead and realized she was right. I had mostly slept all day and stayed in my room the last couple of days. I am fine, Mom. I gave her a half smile, which I quickly realized appeared to be more of a grimace. Are you sure? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. My dad looked at me in concern. He stood up and walked over to be grasping my arm softly. You know you can talk to me, right? I nodded my head as he whispered. Good, and kissed my forehead. This coffee is for you, sweetie, Mom said, handing me the thermos I had seen earlier. Thanks, Mama. I smiled with a sigh. I better get going. I looked down at the cup and hesitated. I didn't want to go. Something felt off about me, but I pushed the feeling aside and looked at both of my parents with a soft smile. Love you guys. Love you, honey. My mom smiled. Stay safe. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. My dad called behind me. I snatched my purse and coat that were hanging by the door, before grabbing my keys. The hospital was too far to walk to from my home, so I opened the garage, seeing my blue 1988 Chevy CK15 truck. BRUBLU. That was her name. Getting in the car. The familiar smell of diesel and my parents filled my nose. This car smelled like home. It had been my dad's first car, and when I turned 16, he gifted me good old blue. I treasured her, especially the fact that even with 70, 0 miles, she still ran well in winter. Turning the car on, I backed out of the driveway and headed to the hospital. You made it. Maudie wrapped me in a large hug. Pulling back, I smiled at her. I noticed her blonde hair was down in waves, and something about her overall demeanor just seemed relaxed. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I couldn't miss seeing Mr. Weaver for the world. Looking behind her, I saw Mr. Weaver laying in the hospital bed, wires attached all over his body, and a IV drip in his arm. The hearty man with the bushy mustache had been reduced to a frail and slight man. He was pale and his face lacked color. I was surprised when my eyes met someone else in the room. My breath caught in my throat. Connor. What is he doing here? His head had been resting on the bed beside Mr. Weaver, and he sat up quickly, hearing his name. What happened? He searched the room with his gaze, relaxing when he saw Maudie and I. Oh, you scared me. He breathed out a sigh. He smiled and stood up. Hi Evelyn, how are you? I tried to come up with words but found my mouth glued shut as I stared at him. I thought that he and Maximus had left. If he was here, did that mean? What are you doing here? I asked, gaping. He swallowed and scratched his neck. I wanted to meet the man who raised the love of my life. My eyes widened and my mouth was left agape. Well. That was quick. I looked between Maudie and Connor with a finger waving between the two of them. So you guys? You're a couple. Maudie laughed and smiled. A smile I hadn't seen grace her face since Mr. Weaver's diagnosis. Taking Connor's hand in her, she smiled up at him, and then looked back at me. Well, I was going to wait a little longer to tell you, eh? I love you so much, so I wanted you to know, but... Well, I didn't want you to freak out like you are now. My gaze softened and I smiled. Maudie, trust me, I'm not freaking out. I'm only a little surprised, that's all. As long as you're happy, then I'm happy too. And reached out, giving her hand a squeeze. I turned to Connor. So if you're here, then Maximus. Please say he is here. Connor offered a sympathetic frown. He went home. Evelyn. I nodded my head, ignoring the stinging feeling in my eyes. Pain riveted through my soul. I felt nauseous. For a split second, I had allowed myself to hope. Hope that maybe Maximus wasn't gone after all. But he was nonetheless. Evie. Darling, is that you? I heard a voice croak. Wiping my tears, I whipped my head around towards Mr. Agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Mr. Wee. Calling him the childhood name I had known him by, he cracked a laugh in return, which soon spotted into a cough, and I helped him sit up. Worry coursed deep through me, the bones I felt poking out of his back as I helped him. How are you, Mr. Weaver? I asked, holding his hand. My golden eyes searched his stone blue eyes. Oh, I'm okay, Evie. Just taking it one day at a time. Cancer may be in my bones, but I'm still just as strong. He winked at me. He raised an arm and pretended to flex a muscle. However, I didn't miss the way he silently winced when doing so. I laughed at his antics, hoping to keep the mood light and cheery. How about you, darling? How are you? Any boys I need to beat up for your old man? I smiled but looked to the ground, unable to meet his gaze. No boys. Good. They couldn't handle Grandpa Weaver anyway. He began to cough and soon it turned violent. Maddie rushed over to help Mr. Weaver returned to laying down and Connor was at her side. "Why don't we let you rest, Mr. We?" I whispered. He nodded his head and gave my hand a squeeze. Thank you for seeing me. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I smiled as tears filled my eyes. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Mr. Weaver. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Letting go of his hand, I looked at Maddie who was holding back tears of her own. Connor rubbed circles on her back and I watched as she turned and wrapped her arms around him. He kissed her forehead, choosing her softly. "Want to go get lunch?" "Meds?" I asked her gently. She turned around and faced me with red puffy eyes. No, thank you. I think it's best I stay with Grandpa." She tried to offer a smile. Nodding, I gave her a hug and waved goodbye to Connor. Looking out at the deserted road, I noticed my vision getting a bit blurry. Blinking my eyes, I refocused on the road. I smiled as I glanced up at the large snow-covered mountain tops that surrounded us. What do the mountains look like where Max lives? I noticed myself feeling a bit faint and sick. I shook my head though and rolled my shoulders back, eyes staring intently at the road. Suddenly, pain filled my abdomen like cramps and I groaned. "Ugh, what is wrong with me?" I questioned aloud. Luckily, I was turning the corner onto my road and our little white home was in sight. Pulling into the driveway, I stumbled into the house. I took off my coat and shoes, and hung my purse and keys by the door with shaky hands. I inhaled deeply and held a hand to my chest. "How was seeing Mr. Weaver, honey?" my mom asked as I made my way into the kitchen. Fine," I muttered. "I need water." I grabbed a glass and my hand shook a bit. Filling it with water, I raised it to my lips only for it to fall to the ground and shatter. I screamed as glass entered my foot. Crap. "Oh my gosh, honey," my mom yelled. She hurriedly cleaned the glass while my dad helped me limp over to the couch. "I'll cold drive." To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. He stated urgently, running to grab his phone. Within 10 minutes, drive. Grady and Katie and Kayla were at the house. Once again, and looking over my wounds. "Goodness. Evelyn, how did this happen?" she asked me, voice laced in concern. She had pulled all the glass out and was now bandaging my foot. "I don't know, drive." "Grady, I don't know. I've been feeling a bit lightheaded and shaky and I just lost grasp." She hummed, grabbing a thermometer and taking my temperature. "You are running a low-grade fever. 99.5. Spend the next few days resting." To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. "It sounds like you just have a small cold. You'll be better in no time." She smiled. "Will do." I nodded. Kayla gave me a hug. "Feel better, APA. I know you'll be good in no time." I smiled at my friend as she and her mom left the house. Closing my eyes, I decided I would try and sleep it off. I woke up shivering. The surface beneath me felt cold, almost frozen. I looked up and expected to find the white living room ceiling and instead was met with a starry sky. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I sat up and saw a bloody trail of footprints sunken into the snow from the house, leading to the spot I sat in. Her covetantling. I quickly looked to see I was bleeding through my bandages. Blood was pouring from my feet and tainting the white snow. Panic filled my senses as weight filled my chest. I felt like I was suffocating. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Dread. I began to cry as I took shallow breaths. I heard the glass slide door creak and slide open as my dad came running out of the house. "Oh my gosh. Honey," he yelled. He ran at a speed I didn't know was possible, as if he was teleported from the house to the yard in a blur. He wrapped me up in his arms as I sobbed. My tears clung to his robe as he picked me up and rushed me into the house, laying me on the couch. What happened? My mother came running into the room, searching my face in a panic. I was too shocked to even respond. My lips quivered and I hugged my arms to myself. My entire being seemed numb and I had a violent and fearful urge to go back into the forest. My parents wrapped me in blankets, and my mother hugged me and quickly rubbed my back to warm me. I heard my dad on the phone with Drive. Grady and I faded into sleep. I was startled by the feeling of cool ointment on my feet, and something being bound around them. I opened my eyes as Drive. Grady prodded my lips. "Open your mouth, APA. Open your mouth." A filthy tasting elixir entered my mouth, then I gagged. "No, no. Swallow, Evelyn. Swallow," she gently commanded. She patted my back as I drank it. Within moments, I found myself dozing back off to the land of dreams, and all I could see was him. Weeks passed, and something was terribly wrong. Hair pulled back. I lurched into the toilet seat. The empty contents of my stomach revealed as green bile was ejected from my mouth. My throat burned and the aching pain of my stomach was torment. Flushing the toilet, I caught my breath before standing up. I caught my reflection in the mirror. Faded freckles, dull hair, sunken eyes, almost brown, hollow face. For the last 3 weeks I had become violently ill. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobin, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing clichés enthusiasm. We thought it was an infection from my foot, but that soon was proven wrong when test after test came back negative. Every day I fell more and more ill. I lay back down in bed moaning as pain shot through me at contact with the bed. I had chills, a horrible fever, couldn't keep any food down, and had lost at least 10 pounds in a few weeks. To make it worse, every time I closed my eyes, all I saw was him. He haunted my dreams. His face always turned away. We stood in a field. It was summertime by the lack of snow. I tried to run to him, but I couldn't. My feet were stuck in the mud. Soon, I was sinking. I screamed his name. He turned around. He ran towards me in fear. But it was too late. Drive. Grady had no idea what was wrong with me, and my parents even called specialists, all of whom were flabbergasted by my condition. There was no explanation as to what had happened. 3 weeks ago I had run a small temperature, and been a bit shaky. Now I was sitting at death's door, waiting for him to open up. My parents tried to hide their concern, but I heard their muffled whispers. "John, she's going to die if we don't do. There must be." My mother sobbed in the hall. "Sylvie, she's going to be okay." My dad tried to reassure her, but I knew by the tremor in his voice that he didn't believe it either. My parents went to bed and I found myself alone in my room, staring at the ceiling as black dots filled my vision. I felt like I would fade from consciousness. Lying in bed, darkness clouded my periphery, and then suddenly, I felt a tug in my chest, almost as if coming from my heart, and the pain became searing, like I was stabbed with an iron knife. I muffled my sobs, knowing my parents were outside the door. They peeked their heads to check in, and a moment they had left and I heard them go downstairs. I sprung up in bed. I was weak, but the unyielding feeling compelled me. No, forced me. At this point, the pain had intensified to a scorching burn. It threatened to smother me to death. I felt suffocated, but the moment I stood up, I began to feel a small release, like air seeping out of a tiny hole in a bowl. It was minimal, but there. And so I began to walk. And the more I walked, the more the pain released. I walked out of the house and into the forest. Far from my home, I felt like I was following a song, a whisper calling to my soul. My eyes closed, and in some way, I was conscious and yet asleep. Yet, I trusted the whisper to guide my feet through the forest. The pain was getting lighter and lighter. My feet made contact with a smooth, cold surface. Step, step, crack, glacial cold, frigid to the bone. No air. Eyes open. It's everywhere. Looks up. Panic. Beneath ice. Open mouth for breath. No air. Drowning. Conscious fading. This is the end. Darkness. Welcome. Goodbye. Max Chapter 12. Maxiness after hours of driving. I was back to my pack. And yet, it felt foreign. I turned onto the dirt road, looking at the rusty and dilapidated night wind sign. It seemed like it was from a memory of long ago the way it was aged. I peered through the dense tree line, eyes scanning my periphery. Then, it came into view. My house. The large 2-story wooden cabin was set back deep in the woods, far away from the rest of the pack which lived closer to town. As I parked the car and entered the large home, the silence was deafening. 20-foot high ceilings made of mahogany left the space lacking warmth. It was freezing in the house, so I walked through the foyer to the living room. I walked to the fireplace, placed firewood in it, and began a fire. As I watched the wood catch flames, I couldn't help but remember Evelyn's dreams. So late and I felt myself compelled to go to another part of the house. Leaving the fireplace, I walked up the balcony of stairs to a room I hadn't entered in years. The library. Passing shelf after shelf of dusty books, my eyes came into contact with a rocking chair and fireplace that hadn't been used in 20 years. I kneeled before the fireplace and felt tears sting my eyes as I looked at it. I will have a grand library, full of a massive collection of books and complete with a fireplace. My husband and I, we will read stories to them every night, huddled around that fireplace, she said with a smile. But, instead, I sat in a dark library. There was no warmth, no fireplace glow. It was covered in dust, untouched and unseen. It would never hear the giggles of children or sighs of contentment. It would remain haunted by the absence of her spirit. Ugh! God, why? I yelled into the abyss, fingers gripping my hair. No one could hear me. No one could hear my shouts. No one could hear my cries. Hugging my knees to my chest, I sobbed over and over again until I felt sick. I cried for the woman I could never have. I cried for the family I would never have. I cried for the loss I hadn't experienced. I felt like I was regressing to the little boy who had been so weak again. You disgusting being. You're cursed. She screamed at me. She threw a glass at me and I dodged it, hiding behind a counter as it shattered against the wall. I was 13 years old, but that didn't stop her from hating me, from hurting me, stomping around the corner. The women looked deranged. Her red hair was in disarray and her eyes were filled with rage. Come here, you murderer, she screamed. She lunged at me with a knife, and I ran out of the house and into the forest. Harder. I willed myself to get to safety. I ran and ran until I entered the old cabin, running into the house. I climbed the banister and entered the library. Sitting at a fireplace, I held my knees to my chest and sobbed. Then, something clicked in me, like a circuit had been wrong all along and suddenly went into place. Pain shot through my body as bones cracked into places they never had before. I shifted for the first time. Most children would be scared, but I wasn't scared, no. I was ready for revenge. Standing up, I shook the memory from my mind. I rolled back my shoulders, the memory triggering a strength within me. I refused to mope around. I had a duty as an alpha. Standing up, I walked to my bedroom and changed into a flannel shirt and jeans. Exiting the house, I hopped in my car and drove to the pack house to immediately begin work. I looked up at the stars as I exited my car. Like everything, they seemed to make me think of her. My soul seemed to be screaming at me to hop back in the car and go and get her. To snatch her up and tell her how much I love her. To apologize and hold her. And never let go. But I refused the mate Bond's call. The massive log building that was 3 stories high faced me, and I walked towards it. It was late at night, so I didn't expect many people to be there. Passing through the doors, I instantly felt their stares. I smelt their fear. I hated it. It was like my skin was crawling. They were repulsed by me. And I of myself. I remember when I first smelt fear. I remember standing in the shower scrubbing my skin wishing it would go away. To my agent extraordinaire, Myelin Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I'm a monster. I'm a monster. I scrubbed until my skin bled. But, no matter how raw my skin was, I couldn't get rid of the stench. I had allowed myself to get caught up in the fantasy of Ice Valley, in the falsity of her words, and I'd forgotten who I really was, a man who was feared not loved, the place where I was supposed to be at home. I was more of an outcast than anything. Looking up, I shot glares in the direction of the few people who had stared at me, and they looked to the ground whimpering before quickly dispersing. I had no doubt I wouldn't encounter another soul again. They would all likely mind link each other to stay clear as they always did. Walking into my office, a person quickly stood up. Hello. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Hello. Gamma's Xerxes. I nodded. The man stood tall, spine straight, as his onyx skin stood in contrast against his white T-shirt. Caleb Xerxes was my second in command. My Gamma. He had served as a general in Ghana, fighting off guerrilla warfare fighters. Because of this, he had a militant presence and also a strong ability to follow orders. Anything to report from patrol. I asked him, grabbing a folder from my desk which held any and all notes on reported abnormalities. We captured some rogues in the Southern Territory. Caleb spoke. They don't seem to pose immediate harm to the pack, but further interrogation may be necessary. I think there's potential they could be of harm. I nodded my head, flipping through the notes he had made about them. 11 p.m. Tuesday night. Strange sounds heard at the southern border. Scent picked up by junior pack watchmen. 2 children found. Refused to answer questions about why they were on pack property. No adult rogues in sight. 10-year-old girl. Defensive and will not answer questions. Seems agitated. Had knife. 5-year-old boy. Scared and timid. Appears to be mute. Possible further evaluation is needed to ascertain the threat level presented. Please tell me you're fucking kidding. I turned to Caleb with a glower. Caleb held my gaze firmly, but I saw the way he shifted his shoulder ever so slightly. A sign of discomfort. No, sir. What is there to joke about? Looking pensive. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I glared. They are fucking children. There is nothing more to talk about. Find a family suitable to take care of them immediately if their parents can't be found. Caleb nodded his head and left swiftly. Thinking of the poor children, I couldn't help but think of my Ev. She would have raced down and swooped those children into her arms herself. She would have comforted them and read them stories. She wouldn't have thought for even a moment that they could be dangerous. Goddess. She seemed to haunt my thoughts. Even now, I could practically smell and see her, sitting down at my desk and looking around. I suddenly was made aware of Connor's absence. Dialing his number into the phone, it rang a couple of times before it picked up. Hey Maximus. What's up? Connor sounded exhausted. What's up with you, Connor? You were supposed to be coming back today. What happened? Listen. Maximus. Maudie won't come back with me. I tensed. A fear grappling my stomach at the thought of my friend losing his mate too. Connor was too good for that. Connor wasn't like me. He deserved his mate. What do you mean she won't come back with you? Her grandfather, Mr. Weaver, the man who raised her, is seriously ill. Maximus. He is going to pass in the next few weeks or months. Maudie won't leave his side and I don't blame her. So, as long as it's okay with you, I'm going to stay with her for a few weeks. And then she has agreed to come back with me. I let out a sigh of relief. Yeah. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. That's fine. Man, take care of her. I wanted to ask him how Evelyn was even though it had only been a day. But I restrained myself. Forget about her, Maximus. Forget. She's better off without you. Maximus, don't you want to know about now? And I hung up the phone, turning to my desk. I looked at the pile of paperwork before me with a sigh. Picking up a sheet, I began the long and tedious process of signing and denying requests. Contract, alliances, and so on. I was back to the same mundane, lacking existence as before. But I would bury myself in piles as high as my ceiling if it meant getting my mind off of her. Weeks had passed, and with every growing day, I felt my resolve weaken. I was growing weak from the strain of being away from my mate, and my wolf seemed to push to the forefront as a result. My temper was short. Where the hell is my coffee? I growled at a secretary in the office. I'm sorry, Alpha, it there's spilled. She stumbled as tears poured down her face. My nails had elongated and dug into my desk, scratching it. With all the control I had in me, I gritted my teeth and pushed my wolf down. Get out was all I was able to grit out. As the secretary fled in fear, I yelled at almost anyone who came near me. Gamma Xerxes had knocked on my door for a status report. Why the fuck are you knocking at that door? Status report. Sir, he said with a gulp. Oh, a fucking status report, I said in a sing-song voice. It auntie. The report. It out. I slammed my hand down on the desk and it broke. I was slowly losing sanity, losing control. I had always been a harsh alpha, but this was a new level of madness. I grew concerned I might actually hurt someone in my pack if I continued to stay at the pack house for work. So I moved all my work to my house. Sitting at my desk in the house, I put my face in my hands. I was starting to feel not only agitated but a bit ill. I groaned, knowing who I needed to call. I had to call Connor. Connor always offered up the best advice. He was always there for me even in the times I didn't want him to be. Dialing his number, it rang before picking up. Hey Maximus, what's going on? And I explained. I told him everything that had happened. My agitation, my loss of control, my fear of hurting pack members. Sighing into the phone, I could almost see Connor rubbing his temple. That's not good, Maximus. That's not good. Yeah, I knew that part already. I rolled my eyes. Did I think I might know what's going on? My ears perked up. I think you seriously need to come down here. Evelyn's been. No. I shouted at him through the phone. Just no. Stop trying to bring her up. Every time I call you, you try. Do you know how much it fucking hurts each day? Do you know how crazy I am going? If I didn't deserve her before, I certainly don't now. I'm fucking sick. Connor, I could hurt her. The other line was quiet. Connor didn't say anything for a moment. You're weak. Rage burned inside my soul and I felt it threaten to bubble over. What did you just say? You are fucking weak and pathetic, Maximus Octavius Alexander. Your mate is fucking sick. And you've had no idea because you have been too weak to acknowledge she even exists, Connor. I'm fucking finished. You are too weak to admit, even face the fact that someone could actually be capable of caring and loving you. Well, I'm not dealing with your shit anymore.
Grow a pair.
Get off your ass and come here. Help your fucking mate because she is dying. And I have a hell of a feeling it's your fucking. And he hung up. In an instant, rage took over. I slammed my hands down on my desk, splitting it in two. Claws grew as I slashed a wall beside me. I refused to restrain my wolf any further. I shifted into my wolf and ran through the house, then into the forest. I was sprinting in a direction I wasn't even sure of. Just where my instincts took me. I was furious with Connor, but I was more furious with myself. Connor was right. I was weak. I ran for hours. My rage was released with each pounding paw hitting the ground. I ran until my anger had melted away. Night had fallen, and the forest was eerie. I paused in the middle of a clearing, ready to turn back home because I was too weak to face her. I turned around and was ready to run away to my life of misery. But I hesitated as worry and apprehension filled my mind. Is she okay? I seemed to get an answer as a sudden sharp pain filled my body. I felt a sense of urgency. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Strike me. And it wasn't mine. No, it was hers. Panic and pain started to fill my abdomen, and I began to run in the direction that I felt led. It was like an invisible string was leading me through my wolf. Harder run. I had to get there. My paws padded against the dirt as I pushed myself to run at a speed I didn't know was possible. I wouldn't let another person die because of me, not another person I cared about. And then, I found myself digging my paws into the ground, as dirt and snow sputtered behind me. I had halted myself in front of an icy blue lake. She's here. I know it. I searched the horizon and then I saw it. A crack in the ice. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I froze in terror as my stomach sank. No, no. No, Evelyn, no. And then I sprinted. Shifting into my human from mid-run, I dove into the cold abyss, knowing my naturally high body heat meant I could withstand the frigid water. Looking through the water, I saw her there. She was sinking to the bottom, her eyes closing, as air bubbles left her mouth. In swooping motions, I propelled my body towards her and wrapped my arms around her waist. Her eyes blinked open for a split second before she went unconscious again. I was able to see the hole we had both come in through, and I dragged conscious body through the water and to the surface, pulling us out. I landed on the ice and began to cough violently. Grabbing Evelyn, I tried to get a pulse and found a faint one. Putting my head to her chest, I felt blood rush from my face. She wasn't breathing. Placing my hands on her chest, I began compressions. 1, 2, 10, 20, 30. I mentally counted each one. Then, I pressed my lips to hers, blowing in air. I placed an ear to her chest. Still, not breathing. 1, 2, 10, 20, 30. Again, I pressed my lips to hers, blowing in air. Still not breathing. Please. Evelyn, please. I began to cry. I need you. I'm so sorry. 1, 2. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. 7. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 16, 17. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. I tilted her head back and blew air. UCK, Evelyn coughed violently. Relief flooded my chest. As I turned her on her side, water was expelled from her mouth and she hacked. I put an ear to her chest and heard shallow wheezing breaths, but breaths nonetheless, sweeping her into my arms. I flew through the forest, smelling the trail she had left. Please be okay. Please be okay. Please don't die. Please don't die. I can't lose you. I can't. My eyes scanned the tree line, searching for a sign of life. My eyes found a small cabin and I raced towards it. Bursting through the doors, I came into contact with none other than Drive. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. Oh my goddess, she exclaimed, arm and eyes wide. She took in Evelyn's form. She rushed over to me. I'll get Alpha Smith. Get all her clothes off and wrap her in blankets. Hold her to your chest. She's human. So her body temperature needs to be raised immediately. I nodded, quickly removing layers of Evelyn's clothes, shielding my gaze from her body as I did so. I quickly wrapped her in blankets, noticing when I looked at her face that her lips were blue. She was so frail, so pale, so dead-looking. I wouldn't have thought she was alive if it weren't for tremendous shaking. I was horrified. I pulled a blanket around myself before I picked her up and sat before the fireplace. Seated up, I held her to me while feverishly rubbing her back. "Come on, Ev. Come on," I whispered. "I'm so sorry. Evelyn, I'm so sorry. I promise I won't leave again." I kissed her temple as her previous shaking seemed to slow down. What the hell happened? I turned to see Alpha Smith looking at me pale as a ghost. The mate Bond told me she was in trouble. I found her underneath the ice at a nearby lake. I whispered drive. Grady came over to us, feeling Evelyn's forehead. "She's still too cold. She likely has hypothermia. You'll need to stay here for the next few hours." I nodded my head, pressing a kiss to Evelyn's forehead. I saw her father watching us. His face spoke of a million unsaid waves of anger. But, with his daughter's head on my chest, sitting on the brink of death, he wasn't going to say a word. I shifted my body so that we were laying down, closing my eyes and inhaling her soft cotton and lavender scent. Arms held tightly around her, I knew one thing at that moment. I was never going to let her go again. Chapter 13, Evelyn Water. It's everywhere. Looks up. Panic. Beneath ice. Open mouth for breath. No air. Drowning. Conscious fading. This is the end. Darkness. Welcome. Goodbye. Max said he was like an angel, descending into the frigid abyss that would take us both in its arctic claws. I closed my eyes, happy to hallucinate his beautiful being one more time. I could die happy knowing the one man I had ever felt something for had been the last thing I saw. Darkness. I gasped for air, shaking. No, no, no. I was gasping for air. I couldn't drown. My eyes short open and they were met with gelid ones. Ice capped mountains of eyes that I would recognize anywhere. She rubbed my back. "You're safe. Evelyn, you're okay. I'm here," he whispered softly. His arms were wrapped around me, and I was in a cocoon of warmth and safety. It contrasted so greatly with the deathly grasp of cold I had felt just moments before. I was dead. That was the only explanation. Is this teacher afterlife? My eyes welled with tears. No, no. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. It's not the afterlife. You're alive. This is real. I shook my head furiously as hot tears poured down my face. It isn't possible. This can't be real. Max and this wouldn't, possibly hold me. No, no. No, it can't be. I sobbed as I began to hyperventilate. I felt our seating shift as Maximus sat up with me in his arms. He grabbed my hand, which clung to the blanket around me, and moved it to my chest. Evelyn, feel that. Do you feel it? He asks me in desperation. I felt where he placed my hand. Thump, 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 thump. I felt and nodded. You're real. You're alive. He exasperated. No, no. Why you? Why you can't be real. And Max W. wouldn't be he, here? I watched his face grow weary as he sighed. He grabbed my hand and shifted the blanket so half of his chest was exposed. He grabbed my hand and placed it on his chest, whispering, "Do you feel that, Evelyn? Do you feel that?" Thump, 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 thump. I was shocked. It wasn't possible. And yet it was. I'm real. Evelyn, I'm real. He lifted my hand to his cheek and held it. My hand skimmed over his jawline and then skimmed his lip as my hands began to shake Max. I whispered. It was broken. It was hollow. And it expressed my innermost turmoil and relief all in saying his name. Yav. Yeah, it's me. He smiled as tears poured down his face. Oh, how did you? And how am I? W. Why did you? He paused my rambling, gently placing a finger to my lips. I'll explain everything. Everything. I promise you. And I will answer every remaining question you have until you're satisfied. But, right now you need food and rest. So, please let me take care of you before I answer, he pleaded. His eyes shined with sincerity and I couldn't help but nod. He got up and walked over to the stove, and only then did I realize we were in Kayla's home. I added that to the mental list of things I needed to ask Maximus. Here you go. This soup should hopefully make you feel better and regain strength drive. Grady called it her healing soup. He smiled as he passed me a bowl and spoon. As I went to grab them, I noticed the blanket around me. I am without clothes. My cheeks turned bright red. His eyes wide, and I saw him flush, as the tips of his ears turned red. Oh. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. He stumbled as he lifted a spoonful of the soup to my mouth and I didn't realize how hungry I had been until that moment. We sat in silence, Maximus pausing to blow on the soup before guiding it to my mouth. It gave me a sense of déjà vu to when I had cared for him when he had injured himself. So many questions threatened to flood my mind, but I kept them at bay, deciding right now I needed to live in the moment before me. I needed to absorb and take in the warmth and comfort of space and time before it escaped my grasp. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back on the couch after eating my last bite of food. Drifting into sleep, I felt an additional blanket be placed on me. I heard hushed whispering and shifted, mentally willing the voices to quiet as I tried to return to the land of sleep. But the voices persisted, and inhaling deeply, I cracked an eye open and quickly shut it. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. A soft friend and voice whispered. I fully opened my eyes and looked toward the sound. Mama. I smiled to myself. She rushed towards me as I moved to sit up. Helping me, I saw my dad look at me with hollow eyes. He approached slowly as my mother hugged me tightly. We were so worried. Sweetie. My mom's voice cracked as she buried her head further into my neck. I felt her tears as they trickled down my nape. My father sighed, and I turned toward him. He kneeled down and placed a hand on my face, eyes turning glassy. My precious girl, my gift. He smiled through his tears. Papa, what is it? My voice broke, revealing my concern. I glanced behind him, seeing Maximus' towering figure standing in the shadows of the fireplace. He was dressed in a t-shirt and sweatpants. His head hung low, shoulders dropped. What is going on? You know how much I love you, right? How I would do anything for you. My dad asked me, drawing my attention back to him. Of course, Dad. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I laughed through my sniffles. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. There's something you need to know. I looked from my dad to my mom, who held equal tears in her eyes. Honey, I'm sorry we kept this from you. But we love you. We were just trying to do what we thought was best. She murmured, squeezing my hand. I felt panic fill my chest. Dim seemed to look overhead, threatening our reunion. You're scaring me. My voice shook. Evelyn, I'm not a mayor. My father stated, eyes searching my own. Confusion hit me first as I looked at my father in bewilderment. What do you mean you're not a mayor? I'm like a mayor. I'm an alpha. But, rather than the leader of a group of humans, I'm the leader of a group of what, Dad? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I asked as fear took hold and my breath grew faster and shallower. Of werewolves. Eyes wide, I stared at my dad in horror. What kind of sick joke is this? I questioned in a whisper. I began to stand up, holding my blanket tightly around myself. The second I stood, I began to get lightheaded and my vision turned black as my parents grabbed me and pulled me back down to the couch. "Honey, it's not a joke. Your father and I," she motioned between them, "we are werewolves. Everyone in the town. We are all werewolves," my mother stated. I shook my head furiously, back and forth, holding my forearms. "And no, you are not." Hot tears poured down my face as I looked into my parents' eyes in disbelief. Yes, my father was cut off. "Prove it," I snapped at him. My father stood up and stood quietly for a moment. He was completely still. Then, he nodded his head. He motioned to Maximus, who came over to me slowly, approaching me as one does a timid puppy. "May I?" Motioning with his hands. I gulped and nodded, wrapping an arm around his neck as he picked me up bridal style. Following my father out the door, we stood in the middle of the woods. It appeared to be evening by the darkening color of the sky. My dad stood still again. Before inhaling deeply, he took off his shirt and pants, and I looked away when he moved to strip down further. For a moment, all I could hear was the winds rustling through the trees. Crack, pop, crack. Sounds of bones breaking made me go still as I slowly turned my head back around. Right where my father had been standing, a grey wolf stood. I shook my head as my lip trembled. And no. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Maximus held my head against his shoulder, rubbing it as I sobbed. I felt us move back into the house before he placed me back down on the couch. Then, he stepped back into the shadows. A few moments later, my mother and father walked through the door. How could you? Why would you hide this from me? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. We thought it was best. My mom breathed. Al was lying to me what was best for me. I'm 19. 19 years of lies. What else have you hidden from me? I questioned. We were protecting you. My father shouted. You were in more danger as a human in our world. Knowing about our world would make you an easy prey if an enemy came along. I couldn't let you get hurt. You are our gift. And we never would have had to tell you unless. My face drained. Unless what? I murmured. Maximus stepped out from beside the fireplace's shadow, towards me. It felt ominous and I knew another part of my reality was about to shatter. Then, approaching slowly, he kneeled before me. Would you give us a moment alone? Maximus whispered, turning to my parent. They nodded and left the house. He stared at me and sighed as if he already knew what I would ask. Are you want to? I whispered. He stared at me, his icy eyes searching mine before he nodded. I nodded my head in return, processing what I had just been informed of. Why didn't you tell me? I asked as tears began to pour down my face once more. He reached a thumb out and wiped them, a pained look crossing his features. Evelyn, when you first saw me, before you passed out, your eyes went wide. Why did they do that? I paused, thinking. My dreams. But it was a silly answer quietly. Was it because you met me in your dreams before you met me in real life? My eyes shot open as I inhaled sharply. How? I couldn't finish asking. Because I dreamt of you to Evelyn. I wished for you for years. His hand, now cupping my cheek. Every werewolf has a second half of their being. A soulmate. My other half. His words from weeks before came to mind. It can't be, not. My voice dropped to a whisper as I trembled. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Yes, you. I thought of the girl he had referenced for weeks who my father wouldn't let him see. But I needed confirmation. She was me. She was me all along. I was the girl my father wouldn't let you see. I asked him, tears pouring down my cheeks as I looked at him deeply. Yes, Evelyn. Yes, it's you. It's always been you, he whispered as tears began to pour down his own cheeks. Deep pain was etched into his face as if he was wounded by not telling me. I reached my hands out, gently wiping his tears with the pads of my thumb, before leaning forward and touching our foreheads. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me closer. Silent tears of loss that had poured down my cheeks were replaced by silent tears of joy. He pressed a kiss to my forehead. All these weeks of heartache. To my agent extraordinaire, Mademoiselle, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Of misery, of despair, they were worth it at that moment, just by hearing that I was his other half. Even still, though, my world had been torn apart. As if sensing my pain, Maximus held me tighter as I began sobbing into his shoulder. I felt overwhelmed and like I was suffocating from all the information I had received. Everything I had known and thought about the world crumbled before me. I cried until my eyes felt heavy and Maximus gently lifted me up the couch. As he let go, I reached out an arm to stop him. "See, could you get me close?" He offered me a sympathetic smile and nodded, returning with a large T-shirt and sweats. I grabbed them eagerly. Maximus turned around to face the fireplace as I put them on. The second they were on, I realized they were his, by the strong inward smell that radiated from them. I pulled a blanket on top of my legs. "You can turn around," I murmured. Turning, he looked at my form and I realized how pathetic I must look. My eyes were surely swollen from the crying, and tears remained gently streaming down my face. I sniffled and wiped my nose with the back of my hand. He frowned and walked over to me. Kneeling down, he pushed my hair back from my face and cupped my cheek. "It's going to be okay, Evelyn. It's going to be okay. I know it's a lot, but things will get better." I nodded silently, offering him a half smile to try and thank him. He grabbed a pillow on the couch and propped it behind me as I moved to lay down. However, when I went to close my eyes, I found it feeling impossible. I turned over multiple times, too many questions plaguing my mind. "Max." I opened my eyes and looked at him. "Yes," he answered, turning around. "Would you?" "Never mind." My cheeks turned pink. He walked over to me. "Anything you want, Evelyn. All you have to do is ask. Would you mind holding me and letting me ask you questions?" He grinned and nodded. I scooted over on the couch, as he laid beside me and wrapped his arms around me as we faced each other. I had expected his arms to feel foreign and the experience uncomfortable, but instead I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. His arms held comfort and safety. His arms felt like home. So I began. "All along, my dad. He stopped you from telling me." I gazed at him, mesmerized by his sculpted face. "Yes, I wanted to tell you immediately, but your father wouldn't let me." "Oh, did you know I was in trouble?" Holding me a bit tighter as if needing comfort himself. I had this feeling of panic overtake me. Pure raw fear. It was terrifying, and I knew that you were in trouble. Mate Bond often allows mates to know if their mate is in trouble, but it's unusual to feel it when you aren't. Bonded. I watched as Maximus blushed and scratched his neck. "Could I don't want to overwhelm you with this, and I mean, no, I'll tell you. To my agent extraordinaire, Mademoiselle, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Another time, he smiled and nodded. Another time, thinking of what I'd ask next. It was my turn to blush. Maximus gave me a quizzical look. "What are you thinking about?" He grinned. I hesitated, as my cheeks began to burn even more. The library. Why did you kiss me?" "Because I wanted to from the moment I laid eyes on you but couldn't." But, in that moment, a smile graced his face as he looked down at me. I was so enraptured in the beauty of you, body and soul, that I couldn't help but kiss you. He looked at me for a moment, watching the blush that made my cheeks grow redder. "Can I ask you a question, Evelyn?" Watching the sly grin that crept on his face and knowing I might regret the wrong answer. "Yes, How do you feel? About? He motioned between us. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I know it's a lot and it's just, are you? Uncomfortable. Because I wouldn't want to make you feel. I cut him off, pressing my lips to his. Tenderly, I moved my lips against his own, before pulling back with heat flooding my face. I felt like I had an adrenaline rush as I stared at his gobsmacked expression. I am nervous, and I am unsure how to navigate this, but I know you make me feel things I've never felt for another person in my entire life. And I know you make me happy, and I know I want to be around you. And I paused, unsure if I was confident enough to proceed with what I wanted to say next. But I pushed my nerves aside, and I know you feel like home. And so even if I need time to process, there's nowhere I'd rather be than here with you. Right now. Smiling. Maximus pulled me closer in his arms and looked down at my lips, eyes flitting back up to mine. You're amazing, he breathed, eyes searching mine. May I? He asked, looking to my lips. Yes, I whispered. In a swooping motion, his lips connected to mine. I knew this kiss wasn't like the previous two. It wasn't tentative and reserved, but it was still delicate and tender. His lips moved against mine with eagerness and care, as if he hadn't seen me in 1,000 years and he was giving me his all. His teeth grazed my lip, requesting entrance, and without a thought I accepted, allowing ourselves to explore each other in a kiss. When we finally pulled away, we rested our foreheads against each other as he held me close, pressing a kiss to my forehead. Maximus whispered, "You're everything to me, Evelyn." I closed my eyes and whispered, "What's next?" I felt calloused hands grab my chin as I opened my eyes. Maximus' face had turned serious. "Evelyn, you were sick." "Yes, and?" I asked, confused. "You were sick because of me." "What do you mean?" I muttered as he caressed my cheek. Mates can't be apart for long without getting ill unless they are mated. And I wondered what that meant. But didn't interrupt. For human mates are much more delicate. I didn't know, but for human mates, being away from their mate for too long can drive them to the brink of. This time I sought ear on his face as he looked at me deaf. "I'm so sorry, Evelyn. I'm so sorry." He sobbed into my shoulder. "Schmucks. It's okay. You didn't know." I rubbed his back. "But I should have. I should have realized that if I was suffering you would be too. I was too much of a coward to do what was right." "What was right?" "Max, what do you mean?" "Evelyn, I can't leave you here again, or the same thing will repeat. You have to come back with me and live with me if you want to live." "Have to?" "He doesn't want me to live with him. He doesn't want me. Please tell me he wants me." I nodded my head thoughtfully. I didn't want to uproot you from your life. Let's just go to sleep and talk about this tomorrow. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I asked with a half smile. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. He nodded with a whisper. He closed his eyes, and I found myself unable to stop looking at him. I was worried he was going to fade away and never be seen again. "I feel your eyes. Evelyn." He opened his own. "I'm not going anywhere. Ev," he looked in my eyes. "I'll be right here when you wake up again." Nodding my head, I thoughtlessly grabbed his hand and held it as I closed my eyes. The reassuring feeling of warm water, of energy, that passed between our wrists, a reminder that he was right there with me.